Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another day, another Bible study. Thanks for joining me. We are in 1 Kings chapter 12 today. There's a free PDF on our website. I'm excited about the way the website's growing. We just hit a new milestone today, and Lord willing, it'll continue to grow. We'll talk about that some more, actually, in our application section. If God wants it to, it will. Okay, let's talk about 1 Kings chapter 12. As far as our timeline goes, we just finished the reign of King Solomon. He died in the last chapter after reigning 40 years over Israel and Judah from approximately 1015 to 975 BC. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, is going to take his place as king, beginning his reign in 975. Now, I will say this chapter is really, really important in the history of the nations of Judah and Israel. What we're going to see in this chapter is the nations of Judah and Israel splitting. So from now on, we'll be referring to them as Israel in the southern part of the Promised Land and Judah in the south. Now remember, this was prophesied to Jeroboam by the prophet Ahijah. We're going to see it happen in this chapter. Let's talk about our characters first. Two really important guys. They're easy to mix up because their names are very similar, but these are going to be the first kings of this divided kingdom. First, Rehoboam, Solomon's son. He is going to be the king over Judah. Starts off as the king over both Israel and Judah. We're going to find out what happens in this chapter. Then Jeroboam. Jeroboam was an Ephraimite who was originally a servant of Solomon's, you remember, but he fled to Egypt when Solomon tried to kill him. God selected him to be the next king over Israel, the northern tribes. So as we go to our map, we're going to see these southern tribes of Judah and Simeon kind of broken off from the rest. They're going to go into the reign of Rehoboam. Jeroboam is going to reign up north. He's going to have 10 tribes. Remember, that's what the prophet Ahijah told him. There are a couple other locations that we need to highlight. Shechem, you'll see on the map, in the land of West Manasseh, down the southern part of their land. Rehoboam was made king in Shechem, but later Jeroboam made Shechem his capital when the kingdom split. Jeroboam made 2 golden calves. That's not a good thing. One in Bethel and one in Dan. So Bethel is right at the north of Benjamin's territory, and then Dan is almost all the way up at the top of our map in the land of Naphtali. So they're at kind of the northern border and the southern border. You'll see why in a little bit. Our first section in our outline, verses 1 through 24, Judah and Israel split, the beginning of the divided kingdom. Now, if you remember, there had already previously been some tensions between Israel and Judah. There was already a split in the past. Remember when Ishbosheth was king while David was king in Judah? So there has been some divide, some tensions already. Now we're going to see the tensions boil over to the point where this kingdom's never going to get back together. Okay, so, sorry. I point that out because this really is if you're going to remember a period of time in Israelite history, you're going to make a timeline of like the really key major events. This is one that you need to remember, the dividing of the kingdom after the reign of Solomon. Before Solomon, we kind of call that the United Kingdom, although it was not always united. Call that the United Kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon. And now we're moving into the period of the divided kingdom, which is actually going to be significantly longer. There's a cement truck that just pulled up behind my apartment, so please hold for intermission. Do 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 do. Well, he doesn't seem to be going away, so I guess we're just going to continue the study anyway. Enjoy the noise of the construction and the chicken and the dog. My blood pressure isn't going up. Not at all. Okay, let's talk about our outline. Verses 1 through 24. Judah and Israel split, the beginning of the divided kingdom. The people of the nation gathered at Shechem to make Rehoboam king, to basically go through his coronation process after the death of Solomon. They had a request for their new king, and that was that Rehoboam make their life easier for them. Solomon had really asked a lot of the people with all of his building projects, taxes, labor. The people wanted Rehoboam to lighten their load. So Rehoboam asked them for 3 days to consider, to meet with his advisors and to consider how he was going to respond to them. First, he consulted with the old advisors. These are the men who had served under his father Solomon. They counseled Rehoboam to give the people the relief that they were asking for. But afterwards, he consulted his peers, the young men that he grew up with. And they told him to actually threaten the people and warn them that their lives could get even harder under his reign. When the people returned to Rehoboam on the third day, whose advice do you think he chose? Well, unwisely, he chose the advice of his peers. He heeded the advice of the young men and threatened the people. We're told that this was actually of God. God had his hand in this because remember, he had promised to split the kingdom because of the wickedness of Solomon. So Rehoboam taking bad advice here was in part just the will of God playing out. When the men of Israel heard this threat, this answer that Rehoboam gave them, they were so mad that they split the kingdom. They basically said, you know what, us people from Israel, we're not with you people from Judah. We're taking our ball and going home. We're dividing this kingdom. And now, you're only going to be king over this, tiny portion of the nation. So they rejected Rehoboam's rule altogether, and they left him only governing over Judah. The people of Israel so mad that they stoned Rehoboam's taskmaster to death. Rehoboam gathered an army of 180,000 men from Judah and from Benjamin to make war with Israel and to bring them back into subjection. But the battle never happened because God sent his prophet to Rehoboam and forbid him from going to war against his own people. Now section number 2, verses 25 through 33, Jeroboam makes 2 golden calves. So Rehoboam is king in the south. The people in Israel made Jeroboam their king, just as God had prophesied would happen. Things go south pretty quickly, though, unfortunately, for Jeroboam. Sometime after Jeroboam was king, he started worrying about his people in Israel going south to the temple to worship. Because remember, that's where all the people are supposed to worship according to God's law. He's worried about them going south, though. They're going kind of into Rehoboam's territory. He was worried that their loyalty was going to shift back to Rehoboam, and he would lose his power if they continued to do this. So he decided, well, I'm going to make 2 golden calves, kind of like the golden calf that was made at the bottom of Mount Sinai. That went really well. Well, Jeroboam decides, I'm going to make 2 golden calves. I'm going to put one in Bethel in the southern part of my kingdom, one in Dan at the northern part of my kingdom, and I'm going to tell all the people to go there and worship instead. That way, we don't have to deal with Rehoboam. Now, you might think that the people of Israel would immediately reject this and say, no, we're not going into idol worship after the days of David and Solomon and that prosperity and the success of our nation. But no, the people accepted Jeroboam's idols, and the text says that it became a great sin in Israel. Jeroboam even appointed priests who were not from the tribe of Levi, and he appointed just feast days that he made up, the 15th day of the 8th month, so that the people wouldn't travel to Jerusalem for God's appointed feasts. So he basically just gave them a replacement. God is not going to be too happy with the way that Jeroboam is running the nation of Israel. We'll see that in the upcoming chapters. Jeroboam's disobedience to God kind of becomes legendary and like a benchmark for the failure of the nation of Israel moving forward. So as we leave chapter 12, I know we're over 5 minutes. I've been really bad in the book of Kings, but I feel like so much of this stuff is important to laying the groundwork of the rest of the Old Testament. As we leave chapter 12, we've now got 2 kingdoms, one in the south, which will be known as Judah, the other in the north, which will be known as Israel. We're going to see how the leaders of these new nations carry God's people forward. Do they lead them in the ways of God, or do they lead them in the ways of Jeroboam? That is away from God. So that's kind of where we're headed now that we have this new divided kingdom. Let's talk now about our application quickly. If you ever find yourself in a position of leadership or influence like Jeroboam, serve well so long as God permits you to fill that role, but do not resort to sin to hold on to your influence. God made Jeroboam king, but as soon as he got to power, for some reason, he started worrying that he was going to lose all of his power. And so he resorted to any means necessary to keep it, even rejecting the God who put him on the throne. Our greatest concern shouldn't be our level of influence. Our greatest concern should be serving faithfully in the season and in the role that God has put us in. If God decides to increase our influence, so be it. If God decides to diminish our influence, so be it. Our goal should be to serve faithfully where God places us. The love of power and the craving for influence is ultimately detrimental to that goal.